So welcome to our annual FAFSA workshop. Before we begin, I just wanted to remind everybody to keep your video off and muted. So we're going to keep our mics muted during this session. Now, this is our first ever virtual working session. Today I have with us Mr. Tom Foga. He is the Associate Director of Financial Aid at the College of New Jersey, or TCNJ. He has been working with our school for a number of years as well. So at this point, I'd like for you to just set your speaker to view. So if you go to the upper right corner, if you see the words speaker view instead of gallery view, that means you're not on speaker view. You're going to, right now, you're going to click speaker view so that Mr. Foga is your main focus on the screen, okay? We will be taking questions throughout this session. So this is, again, a working session. If you can type your questions into the chat box during this presentation, we will actually be answering it throughout this workshop. So a little bit different than the financial aid night that we hosted on September 30th. We will be answering questions as if it was a working session, as if it was, you know, the workshop that we typically host in the media center. So just again, a few reminders. You were supposed to have an FSA ID for both student and parents. If you see in our chat box, the FSA ID can be obtained by going to fsaid.ed.gov. You're also, today you should have a copy of your 2019 federal tax income return or any W-2 forms if your student maintained a part-time employment. Also, for the FSA ID, you would have needed your social security number for parents and one for a student, or if you're not a US citizen, an alien registration number for any US permanent residents. You also will need your records of balances in your checking and savings account. Now, you don't need to submit a copy of your statements, your banking statements, but you do need records. You do need the approximate numbers. And finally, the marital status of parents or parents, date of marital status, for example, the date of marriage. And then this is optional. So if it's applicable, if you have your student driver's license number, okay? So if everyone can see me, I will turn the slide over now to Mr. Foga. Mr. Foga, can you turn on your screen? Are you ready to begin?
I am ready.
Okay.
Okay, is everybody, you're still viewing my presentation? Oh no, you're gonna put the presentation up now. Very good.
Yes, we can see your presentation and everyone is in from the waiting room. So I will be monitoring it. If any latecomers come, I will admit them. And I've just asked everyone to submit any questions throughout this, this session. So you can send that into the chat box. Also, as a reminder, the session will be recorded, and any questions that are answered, I will submit the transcript of the chat box onto our school counseling webpage.
Okay.
All right.
Folks, thank you very much for taking time this afternoon to work with me on the FAFSA workshop. And as always, I'm so grateful to work with the folks at Edison High School. So let's get to it, folks. FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. You'll find it at studentaid.gov. Everyone needs to go ahead and get themselves out to studentaid.gov, and this is where we'll start. You should be seeing this screen. And for all of you, unless you've already started it, and I know some folks may have started, but for most of you new to the FAFSA process, that'll be that upper button that says start here. Okay, so let's move forward. Okay. So once you're in, you've got to identify whether you are the student or the parent filling out the application on behalf of the student. Okay, very important, folks, when we start out. If you're the student, make sure you're providing your information in your area. If you're the parent, make sure you're providing your information in your area and your student's information in their area. Okay. Again, you're going to identify who you are as far as the person completing the application. Very important. We are doing the 2021-2022 FAFSA. High school seniors will be freshmen next year, and that will be the 21-22 award cycle. Do not press the 2020-2021. That's for current college students. Okay. As important as your Fsa Id, important to create a save key. A lot of times we cannot complete this application during this session for one reason or another. The save key will allow you to open up the application after you've left it today and save all your work. So you don't want to start it from the beginning again. You want to pick up where you left off. The student is going to, well, first of all, if the student is logging in, they will be pulling information provided that they have their Fsa Id from the application they did prior. So things like your social security number, your name, your date of birth will already be pre-populated. If you're the parent, that may not necessarily be the case. If not, then obviously provide the information. Students without Fsa Ids are going to need to provide this information. Students, be clear that you're providing the correct social security number and that the spelling on the card matches the spelling of your name on this particular slide. Students' phone and email. We highly recommend that students do not use a high school email, because that high school email may be turned off sometime before you hit your fall semester as a freshman. And you'll be doing this application over the next 3 or 4 years, so having an independent email will be important. That's how the federal government's going to notify you when this FAFSA application has been processed. Provide address. Citizenship question. So for federal aid, you either have to be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, permanent resident, or one of the criteria here. Very important, if you're not a U.S. citizen, that you have your documentation so that you're providing the correct number. Okay. Student information. So our students, when they begin college 2021, they're completing their high school diploma. When they graduate from high school, most of us, our first degree or certificate is a bachelor's degree. If you're planning to go to a 2-year school, an associate degree is fine, but it's generally usually your first bachelor's degree. The next question is, will you have your first bachelor's degree before you begin the school year? And that is no, because you're all just graduating high school. And then what will be your status for, actually it's 21-22, this slide needs to be updated, I apologize. Always would be never attended college first year, because you are coming out of high school into college. So you've never attended and you will be a first year student. Last question is, are you interested in college work study? Yes, no, don't know. It's more of a statistical demographic question. It's not going to impact whether or not you're eligible for financial aid or ultimately what your federal eligibility is, okay? It's just a way to let your school know if you're interested in that particular program. Select a service. So for males 18 to 25, mostly 17, 18-year-old high school senior males are required to register with Select a Service in order to be covered or to be eligible for federal aid consideration. You can use this form as a way to register. If you've already registered, then you can skip the question. Males are considered male based on what the sex is on the birth certificate, okay? Student driver's license. So again, another piece of demographic information, especially for students going to a state school. If you've got a New Jersey driver's license, please put that down, very important. It's one of the ways that they help determine that you are in fact a state resident. Students in foster care or parent education completion. If we have any students that are in foster care, please do indicate it. If you're not, please indicate no. If you are, FAFSA will let you know that you're eligible for some potentially other programs and some other types of aid. For the no's, you'll move to the next step, which is high school completed or highest school completed by parent 1 and parent 2. Generally, high school, college, beyond can be unknown. If you're not sure, then by all means provide unknown. This does not impact students' eligibility. It's just information that the Department of Education is gathering on the family educational level of a particular applicant, okay? Next step will be to then provide your high school, okay? name of high school, city that it's in, state that it's in. Okay? Very important to get this accurate. That's very important for the state because it helps them lock into where you're at. Fortunately, we don't have the issue of the John F. Kennedy, because it can be spelled or set up many different ways. Edison High School should come up as Edison High School, and that should not be an issue. Search for colleges. The FAFSA will allow you to select up to 10 colleges that will automatically get this information once you're completed. Keep in mind, you do not have to have applied for admissions, or even you could have just considered the school today. You can put them on the form. After this form is completed, if you failed to put a college on that you're now interested in, or you found some new schools that you're interested in, you can go back and update the FAFSA after it's completed and add and remove schools as you see fit. Keeping in mind that all these schools will get your information. So if you decide to go there, they'll have the FAFSA information.
Sorry, Mr. Foga.
Yes, please.
Could we just go a little bit slower just for those who are finishing up the student demographics?
Sure.
Do we use the same code, the CEEB code, when plugging in our high school information? Do we put the 310?
No, I believe you will type in the name of the school as it appears. So I'm on that high school slide. So what is the name of your high school? I would put Edison High School. I would put Edison, and then I would put New Jersey. And then you should get a screen that looks similar to this with schools that meet that criteria, and really should only be one in New Jersey that I know of. I don't believe there's any other Edison High Schools.
Okay, so we don't need to put any codes at all.
No, there are no codes, unfortunately. No CEB codes. That's more done at the state and more done CSS and other entities. FAFSAs do not have school codes for high schools. They have obviously the school codes for the colleges and universities, but not the high schools.
Gotcha.
Is anybody having any problem finding Edison High School in that?
You can type in your questions now if you have any issues with finding our high school under school selection, or if you're in another area of the application process.
Some of the newer schools, like the Middlesex Technical High School, and some of those schools are not quite in the federal database, but Edison is a long-standing school, so I would have a good feeling that they should be in there, and it should not be a hard one to find.
So you would start off by putting in your personal information in your school, so Edison High School, and then you would go on to selecting up to, is it still 10 colleges that you can put?
Yep, so that's this page, and you can select up to 10 schools. And the way that we do the school search, if you don't know the code, most of us don't, we start by selecting our state. If you have a city or a state, I generally pick the state and I look at the drop down and I run them A to Z, because sometimes the school, the way, just like with the high school, the spelling isn't exactly like the college in New Jersey. The is actually in that, but certain schools, the University of X, won't necessarily have the in the beginning. So if you go by state, generally they'll give you a drop down and you can scroll through all the schools that are available for selecting. If there's a school that you're not finding it, this is a good situation where you may want to save the application, or if you find out the code after it's processed, you can go back in a later date and then add that school in there.
So what you're saying is, if you, let's say you added the 10 schools and you decide later you're not applying, you might be applying to 5 more, or you can change that selection after you submitted the FAFSA, you can go back and you can add more.
That's correct.
Okay.
The most common edit is adding and deleting schools from the FAFSA application, because a lot of times a student this early in the process, the school's not even on the radar yet. And the Fed allow you to go in. That's one of the most common changes. So technically on the FAFSA, if you put 10 on the first FAFSA, once it's completed a week later, you can go into that FAFSA, take all 10 schools out and put in a new set of 10 schools, and it'll create a new FAFSA. So between the 2 FAFSA versions, transaction 1 and transaction 2, I'll send your information to 20 different schools. It's a little over the top, but the idea is it allows the consumer, the client, the student to be able to go in at any time, add and delete schools. And then each time they do that, the FAFSA will create a new version, and that new version will be sent out to all those schools that are listed at that time. So if you leave a school on there every single time, they're going to get the information 2 or 3 times, but every time you add a new school, those new schools will get it. Okay?
Is it still the same where you do the 10, let's say you apply to all 10, and then if you need to add more, you have to delete some, and then you
That is
have
correct.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank
FAFSA will only hold 10 schools at one time. That's why sometimes you may have to take one out. If you put 10 in and you want to add a new one, you have to take one of the original 10 out and add the new one in. But again, it'll produce a new transaction. The original 9 that you kept will get the information again, and the new school that you added on will also get that information. Okay? All right. So we've picked our schools. Next slide would be, in this case, University of Iowa. It would come back. University of Iowa is providing the code. And then they want to know about your housing plans, on campus, off campus, with parents or relatives are generally the 3 choices. If you're looking at residential schools and you're not quite sure, you know, everybody's not quite sure if we're going to be on campus next year. I'm hoping for sure that we are. You want to put on campus. Always want to put your intent. Things can always change, but if I intend to go to University of Iowa and I tend to live on campus as of today, then I want to indicate it as such because I want to communicate to my school, I'm interested in you and I'm interested in being a resident. So that gives them a heads up as terms of when we're processing, we need to include for campus housing and those sorts of costs. This, just like the colleges, you could always go back and change. So if you did submit a college and you said you were going to live off campus, you can always go back in and change it from on campus to off campus, vice versa, etc. Student marital status. Generally, most of you are single, correct? So that's not too much of an issue. There are other choices, but traditional students coming out of high school, that's generally going to be the response. Now we're going to start what's called the dependency section. These next couple slides are how the federal government will determine whether the applicant is a dependent student who's required to provide parental information on the FAFSA along with the applicant, or if the student is independent and not required to provide parental information. So the first question is going to be, do you have children who receive more than half of your support? So you could have a child, but you have to be able to demonstrate that you provide 51% of the child's support. So if you have a child and you're living at home, generally that's not going to meet the criteria.
It's for the student side. So
yes,
you're asking if the student has a child.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, this is from the student perspective because we're still in the student information section. Okay. So there are high school seniors that do have children. I recognize that, correct? But the question is, do they provide more than half the support? And again, that's what a financial aid office will have to determine. If I have an 18-year-old student, freshman, and they tell me that they have a child, then they're going to have to demonstrate to me how they provide 51% of the support of the child. Same with the next question. Do you have dependents other than a child or spouse who live with you and receive more than half of their support from you now and through the school year? This is a question, especially in our area where we have a lot of newly immigrated folks. Somebody may have came over first and then brought other folks over. So I'm a 20-year-old and I brought my 18-year-old brother from the old country and I'm providing the support, and that my little brother lives with me. So there are situations, not very common, but it is, having worked at Middlesex County College during my tenure, I have encountered this on a handful of occasions. So it is possible. It's not in the norm. And again, your financial aid office is going to ask you or have you demonstrate how you provide more than half of that support, okay? Oh, and real quick, just claiming someone on a tax return as an exemption doesn't necessarily meet that standard, right? We're going to ask for more information than just to see your tax return. Okay, as we continue on, we want to know if you're currently serving on active duty in U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training. So if you're being deployed or you've been activated. Are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? Generally not for an 18-year-old, okay? At any time since you turned 13, were both of your parents deceased? Were you in foster care or were you a dependent or ward of the court? Very important. If both your parents are deceased, you'll provide both death certificates to your college, but you'll indicate yes. If you were in foster care, you would indicate yes. If you were a dependent or ward of the court. Now, there are situations where a student at the age of 13 may have been under the care of the state and then returned to the family sometime later. If they can document, and the state will provide you documentation that you were under their care, you meet yes. And that does happen. There are students who are returned to their parents, but meet this criteria. And even though they're living with the parents, they're still entitled to be independent, but you have to meet that criteria. Next question, as determined by a court in your state of legal residency, are you or were you an emancipated minor? In New Jersey, there is no emancipated minor status. There are emancipated students because their parents don't have to pay child support or other things, but an emancipated minor is not a status that's available in New Jersey or the tri-state area for that matter. About more than half the country does not have that status. If you're not familiar with emancipated minor, when I was young, the famous Home Alone actor Macaulay Culkin sued his family. He was 13, and because he was able to take care of himself, he was considered an emancipated minor. In New Jersey, that doesn't happen. That's a red flag. So if someone is checking that off, we're going to be following up with the student right away. Next question, does anyone other than your parent or step-parent have legal guardianship of you as determined by a court in your state of legal residency? Very important, folks. The type of guardianship that the state of New Jersey and the financial aid offices are looking for is kinship guardianship. Custody is not sufficient. It does not meet the standard. I use the example of my nephew. When he was a senior in high school, he lived with my mom and dad because my sister and brother-in-law moved out of district. So my brother and sister-in-law gave my parents temporary custody and guardianship of my nephew so that my parents could sign the documents at school and act as the parents in loci, right? Very important. We go through a lot of, we get a lot of the students who are in some sort of guardianship, but it doesn't meet the standard. So kinship guardianship is the standard you're looking for, okay? If you've answered no to all these, you'll find that you're generally going to be considered a dependent student. They're going to ask you about homelessness or were you self-supporting or at risk of homelessness. That has to be documented by a homeless coordinator, either at the high school, regional, or at the state level. So in this scenario, the student answered all no, and therefore the application is letting them know that they must provide parental information. They're being considered a dependent. Now, there are students that cannot answer yes to any of those questions, but also cannot provide parental information. The FAFSA will then allow you to indicate that I'm unable to provide that information. And then you're what's considered a dependency override. That's something, if you're in that situation, you want to be talking to the folks in your high school because they're going to be aware of it. And there's a process that's involved to allow this type of student to document their situation and become independent, although they could not answer any of these questions. Yes, that requires third-party documentation. It's not an easy process to go through. So a lot of kids want to be independent. Parents want them to be independent because they don't want to put their information on the FAFSA, but it's a very high standard, okay? We'll stop at that. So let's get on to parents. Parents' marital status, okay. As of today, as of the time that you're filling out your application, what is your parents' marital status? Are they married, remarried, divorced, separated, never married, okay? And when we say remarried, that means that if I was married previously, divorced, and I'm remarried, as of today, I'm providing my information based on that remarried status, okay? It's very important. We break it out into parent one, parent two. So for parent one, providing a social security number, last name, first initial, date of birth. Parent one gets to provide a email address. So if we have a married couple that's providing parental information, only one parent can provide a email, and that's parent one. So whichever parent is better about the email, I would say, that's the person's email you want to use in that case. They also will be notified when the FAFSA is processed. So that's important for parents too, because a lot of times the kids aren't looking. And I know a lot of folks will, hey student, I got that email from the feds, your FAFSA's processed, we need to go out and look at it. Parent two, same thing, social security number, last name, first name, date of birth, no email option here. So again, Make sure parent 1 is the one that's the email person. Have your parents lived in Iowa or have your parents lived in New Jersey for the last 5 years? If they have, you indicate yes, because most states require, in order to be considered for state aid, that you have a certain amount of time in state before being considered eligible. Federal government says the minute you're a citizen or eligible non-citizen, you're eligible for aid. Doesn't matter whether you're in the country a day or 100 years. The state of New Jersey is a year prior. So they'll ask 5 years back. If you answer no, they're going to give you an option to say when you lived in the state. Right? So if I came in New Jersey 3 years ago, I would give them that date. Now we're going to go into household size, right? So just like the parents' marital status, household size is one of those interesting pieces, and we want to make sure we get it accurate. So depending on how much parental or how many parental people that you enter, whether it's 1 or 2, that will be pre-populated first here. So in this case, this student provided 2 parents' information. The student, the applicant, is already considered as part of the group. And so now we want to ask the other questions about who else may be considered. So your parents' other children, even if they don't live with your parents, if your parents will provide more than half of their support through 21, 22, these students can answer no. Very important. All those questions that we just went through to determine dependency status for the applicant, that's the same standard that you're going to apply to any of your siblings or parents, any of your children in the household or not in the household. So I may have a child that lives outside the household, but if they cannot answer yes to any of those dependency questions, my student applicant gets to include that sibling in the household. Again, I'll use a personal example. When I was 18, I applied for my FAFSA. My brother's 21, lived on his own, made more money than my father, so my father couldn't claim him. But because my brother couldn't answer yes to any of the questions for dependency, I still got to include him in the family size. So very important, folks, even though they're not living with you, if they're under 24 and they don't meet any of those other criteria, we get to count them. Just conversely, they may be living at home, but if they're 26, they're an independent student, so I don't get to count them in the family count. So again, you want to apply these rules. Other people, if they live with you now, with your parents provide more than half the support, and your parents will continue to provide more than half the support through 2021, 22. This is on a school-by-school basis. I can tell you, for example, at the College of New Jersey, if your grandparents live with you and your parents claim them on a tax return, we would include them. We would not include any nephews and nieces that may be living with you, any cousins, any aunts or uncles. We would consider siblings older than 24 years old who are developmentally disabled and are under the care of your parents. So there are exceptions that can be made. They have to be documented. So in this particular application, it's the 2 parents and the student. They didn't have any other siblings who met that criteria. So ultimately the family size is 3. And then of that 3, 1 is going to college. This could have easily been a family where there was 2 parents, the applicant, and then another sibling. If that other sibling is in college, we would indicate that down here, okay? All right. Now we're on to the tax section, okay? Now this is for the parents, okay? So we're talking about the parents' tax information now. So for 2019, and again, it's about 2019, they want to know what's your tax filing status. So for most of us, we've already filed. There's a handful of us that may or may not have an extension, but generally at this point we've filed, so we would select already completed. If you do not file because you receive Social Security or other benefits, you'll indicate that you do not file or will not file. If your taxes are extended for extenuating circumstances, you will indicate will file, okay? That's an estimated status. Type of tax return is going to be a 1040. Tax return filed. So you want to be looking at that tax return. What was your filing status? Most married people are married and they file jointly. I do not. I am married, but my wife and I file separately. If you're a single parent, you may be head of household. Okay, so there's generally 3 options for a parent: married jointly, married separately, or head of household for a single parent. Okay. If you are a single parent, filed head of household, or a married couple, filing jointly, you will be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. And we highly recommend it because it helps to eliminate a lot of errors, and it helps to minimize what's called verification selection, where if the government selects you for verification, I've got to ask you for provide tax documents and other things after the fact. So if you meet that criteria, we want you to try to link to the IRS. If you're like me, you have to do it the old-fashioned way. You have to get the tax returns out, and I have to add the numbers together for all the questions that are answered. Okay, go to the next slide.
Sorry, just to interrupt.
Yeah, please.
So
Sure.
for the IRS retrieval tool, I do know that you must have the parent's FSA ID in order to link your FAFSA to the IRS retrieval tool.
That is correct. The FSA ID is the way that you will go ahead and confirm to the IRS you are the actual tax filer, and that will allow you to bring it over. If a parent does not have the FSA ID but does meet this criteria, this may be one of those situations where we want to use the save key, complete the application, but do not submit, and come back once we have the FSA ID, go in and complete the FAFSA and use the IRS data retrieval tool. That's entirely up to families. If you're doing the FAFSA October 15th, you're way ahead of the schedule. I think it's worth waiting a couple of days if you don't have your FSA ID to get it to use this tool, because it really does eliminate a lot of errors, and it really does reduce the possibility of being selected for verification.
So for those who may have issues with that, because sometimes it has to match your address that's listed on your tax return exactly. So your home address, the mailing address. So I've had students and parents, if you do encounter issues with that, you would go on to the next page of, so let's say you can't retrieve the IRS database. You would have to follow your paper copy of your tax return. You would have to follow line by line in terms of like the gross and the net income in order to fill it out manually.
That is correct. Yep. If you're unable to, for whatever reason, to be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool, you clearly have to have paper copies of your 2019 tax return, and you're going to sit down the old-fashioned way, and FAFSA will tell you, provide me line X for adjusted gross income. So in my case, married filed separately, I'd have to go out to my wife's tax return and my tax return. Line 7 is the adjusted gross income, so I have to get both numbers and then add them together and then manually input them into the system. Okay, and that's definitely as Miss Cindy had said, you could have your FSA ID and everything in order, but I moved last year, so now my addresses are different, so I can't pull the information up because it's not an exact match. That's okay. That's why you have the manual process too. But again, if you're able to use retrieval, I would definitely use it. Okay, so next slide, if you're attempting to use it, you're going to indicate which parent is providing the ID, whether it's parent 1 or parent 2. Generally, at least one parent in the household has the FSA ID. It's not required that both parents have it. So again, whether it's parent 1 or 2, you're going to provide the FSA ID and your password. It's going to let you know that you're leaving the FAFSA site and then to proceed out to the IRS site. Okay. Once you get out here, you're now leaving the site. Click OK to continue. Absolutely. This is what the IRS screen will look like, so that you'll provide your name, social security number, date of birth, marital status, and as Ms. Cindy had indicated, the address information from the 2019 tax return, not necessarily your current, because remember, they're looking at the 2019 data, so whatever was on there, that's what you're providing. Okay. Again, the rest of the information, you'll hit the submit button. It'll bring up this field where it lets you know that you're in there, it's ready to grab the stuff, and then you'll tell it to transfer my tax information. If you've gotten this far, I don't think you want to use do not transfer. I think you want to transfer the information over. And just to let you know, when the information comes over, it is masked, so you will not see the numbers. Okay, it worked properly. The point that it's masked is to help protect your information. Okay, so people can't snatch it off the internet. That's a security feature. The first year they did the data retrieval, you could see the numbers coming over, and the next year they stopped because that was a place where people were vulnerable to having their information taken. Okay, you successfully transferred the information. Fantastic. What was the adjusted gross income for that? Yeah, I really don't understand that question because you're not going to see it on there. It pulled it over, which is fine. Generally, the FAFSA or the IRS data retrieval is dealing with two primary tax pieces: your adjusted gross income, U.S. taxes paid. It does not determine who made what as part of the adjusted gross income. We'll deal with that in a minute. It does look for some other items, tax deferred, untaxed pension withdrawals, and certain other things that may appear on the tax return, but it's generally going after your adjusted gross income and the U.S. taxes you paid for 2019. This is the question that trips folks up. Parent income from work, all right? But Tom, I already gave you my adjusted gross income, the IRS. Exactly. Tom and his wife make $100,000. Who makes what? So in my house, we each make the same amount of money. So my adjusted gross income would say $100,000. And when I get to this box, parent one makes $50,000 and parent two makes $50,000, okay? Income earned from work, that's the income from your W-2s, your salaries, your 1099s. If you are a business owner, it comes from your Schedule C, okay? So some families, the wage earner, we have one parent who has a regular job to get a W-2, and then another parent may be self-employed. Both parents have income earned from work, and both of them will report this here. It's very important because I know that trips people up, but that's what they're looking for, okay? On your tax return, you know, a lot of times your wages are all combined on line one, so we're seeing the total number. But if both parents are working, the government wants to know who's doing what. So if we have any questions on that, I'll stop for a second because that's very important, because a lot of folks make that mistake and don't understand what the Fed is actually trying to ask of them. And again, they just want to understand from your adjusted gross income who is earning what, okay?
So is this gross or is this the adjusted or the tax net income?
This slide is actually the W-2 1099 information. This is not adjusted gross income. This is what I made, okay? Because remember, in your adjusted gross income, you could have things like taxable interest, you could have investments, you could have other income that's not derived from working, correct?
So this is the, right, so we're following where it says the Form 1040, line 1. So you just go on to your tax return, you would see line 1 plus Schedule 1, lines 3 plus 6 plus 14. Is that correct?
That's correct. But remember, if you're a married couple and both people are wage earners, line 1 is going to be a combined number. It's going to represent both parent 1 and 2. So here we have to separate from line 1 who made what. Okay, so if you have joint income and a joint tax return and both folks are receiving W-2s or 1099s from their jobs, it's going to be a combined total. That's why it's important for the parents now with their IRS tax packet, their tax return packet, is to look at the W-2s and separate what the parent 1 make, what the parent 2 make from the jobs. Not any investments, not any other stuff, but just the things that we get from our jobs and our employers at the end of the year, okay? And we break that out per parent. So if mom's got 2 jobs and dad's got 1 job, there's 3 W-2s that combine to make the number on line 1. We want to see mom's information, her 2 W-2 totals, and then say dad's W-2 total in his section, or parent 1, parent 2, okay? All right, continue on. You indicated your parents filed a 1040. Did your parents file a Schedule 1? How do I know if I file a Schedule 1, Tom? You want to look at the first page of your 1040, and that Schedule 1 should be included in that packet. So you're going to answer yes or no. You could also don't know. Next question is, as of today, either of your parents a dislocated worker? That's very important because with COVID, there's been a lot of displacement of employment. So if you are a parent currently a dislocated worker collecting unemployment, meeting that definition, be sure to indicate yes. You may be going back to work next month, But at the time that you're doing the application, you are a dislocated worker. So you need to make sure that you indicate that. That's important. 2019, 2020, did your parents or anyone have in household receive any of the following benefits? Medicaid, supplemental Social Security, supplemental nutrition, free or reduced lunch, temporary assistance, WIC, etc. These are all federal benefits that will not appear on the tax return, but they help provide an explanation of how families support themselves, especially if they are low income or have no income, right? Because the government's going to question, how can you live on zero? That's an impossibility. Or if you're a family of 5, how can you live on $10,000 a year? But if you have these supplemental programs, it tells both the Fed and, just as important, it notifies the state why or how a family is managing. When you don't indicate these things, then you raise questions. So please do indicate that. And do know that this information is private. It's between you, the feds, and the state, and then ultimately your school. No one else knows other than those entities. And we're all required to keep this information private. But again, it does help to explain the economic picture or how families are making it happen, okay? All right. So any additional IRS information? So again, back to the tax return. Do you have anything on line 14, and do you have a Schedule 2? Okay. Again, as Ms. India said earlier about the fact that if you're manually inputting the FAFSA because or the tax information because you cannot use the Irs Data Retrieval Tool, so important to have that copy of the tax return in front of you because the FAFSA will tell you what lines to go and get. Okay, so in this case, they want to see line 14 minus line 2. If there's nothing on a line, it's a 0. Okay. Did your parents have any of the following items? Okay, these are additional tax benefits or income benefits that aren't necessarily collected up on the tax return. First one is combat pay. So a lot of our folks who have been deployed in the last 4 years may be collecting combat pay. That's where you report it. If you've got students, and this would not be for freshmen, but sophomores and juniors, if you've had college grants and scholarships that you had to report as income to the federal government. So that's a good situation. If you're getting enough scholarship that it exceeds your tuition and fees and you have to report for taxes, you got a really good financial aid package. But that's how they account for that there. Educational credits, again, from your tax return, Schedule 3, line 3. Untaxed portions of IRS distributions, again, lines 1040 lines 4A minus 4C or 4B minus, or no, plus 4D, excuse me. Exclude rollovers. If negative, enter as 0, okay? A lot of folks have changed jobs and it looks like the money came out, but it'll indicate rollover. So in that case, it's a 0, okay? IRA deductions to pensions to self-employed, SEP, simple, KIOG, and other qualified plans. Again, Schedule 1, and then you want to use the lines. Tax exempt interest. Whoops. Did I get, oh, went to the wrong page. Sorry about that. Let's see. Tax exempt interest, 1040 line 2A. Okay, again, have that tax return in front of you. If there's nothing there, it's a 0. Folks, any of these questions, if they do not pertain to you, provide a 0. That lets the application know that you did respond to that question and it's not applicable. Okay, when you leave things blank, it can tend to make the application reject. Very important, especially when it comes to income information. Okay. Did your parents receive any of the following? Child support your parent paid. So I have a child from from a previous married and I pay child support. So the federal government allows me to indicate that there because that allows me to reduce my overall income. So if I'm making $50,000 and I'm paying $10,000 in child support, the Fed is looking at me as a 40,000 person, right? Because they understand 10 of that 50,000 went out the door for required obligation and therefore should not be calculated as part of the student's FAFSA process. Earnings from cooperative educations offered by the college, taxable earnings from need-based employment programs such as federal work study or need-based employment. That's one of the positives of federal work study. So if a student has a job on campus and they're a federal work study, They may have to file a tax return. They will provide it in their student financial section, which is coming up. But this question allows them to then pull the money back out. So it ends up making it a zero. So if I made $6,000 in college work study one year and I reported here, it's effectively a zero on the application, which is nice. So that's one of the benefits of work study. Aside from being on the campus, you can wash it out as part of the FAFSA process. Okay?
Can you explain what work study is?
Yeah, real quick. So federal work study, schools get a what's called a campus-based grant. So for example, the College of New Jersey will get $1 million of federal work study. We're required to take that money, provide jobs, and hire students who have completed a FAFSA and have financial need. Some more terms I'm throwing out there, but you all had the financial aid night. So we can provide them on-campus employment, just like a regular job. They get a check every 2 weeks. They have to pay taxes, FICA, and all that. But the funding is coming from Washington, and it's what's called self-help aid, right? Grant aid is the free aid. Self-help aid is aid that you take that helps yourself. So you have to earn this money. You have to go out and work for it. But it's a way to help provide employment opportunities on campus. It clearly helps colleges supplement their workforce. Okay, so for example, the College of New Jersey, we have $1 million in work study, but we match that with our own money. So now we have $2 million in student worker money. So it's a big boost for schools, but it must be used to employ students on campus. Students have to have filed a FAFSA. They have to have financial need. If you meet all that criteria, then it's possible to receive this sort of funding, these sorts of jobs. Nice opportunity. It's a great source of funding both for the schools and the students. Okay. All right. Did your parents have any of the following? Child support receipt. So if if I'm receiving child support, I have to show it here. Okay. And folks, I only want to know about the actual amount you received. The court order might say X, but if I received less than X, I want to know what less than X is. Do not give me monies that you didn't receive, because they are going to add this onto your income. Whereas when you pay child support, they subtract it from your income. When you receive child support, they add it back to your income. So you want to make sure you're only accounting what you actually get. Okay. Housing and food, living allowances paid to military, clergy, other folks that are in that situation. Payments to tax deferred pension savings plan. So again, parents, the W-2s are really important, because on your W-2 form, boxes 12A through 12D are where we put the tax deferred information. Now, there are a lot of codes out there. We are only interested in D, E, F, G. Whoops, let me get my cursor over here. D, E, F, G, H, and S. Double D is a very common tax deferred criteria, but it's not required to be reported. So if you are giving me any double letters like a double D or double E, that's wrong. That doesn't belong on there. Or any other letter that's not here. So it's just 1, 2, it's like 5 letters. You might have, tax deferred code C or code Z. Don't want to see it. Only want to see these pieces. Very important. A lot of folks right here, and they put this double D as a common one. Don't report that double D. Okay. And it's usually a big number, and it'll affect your FAFSA. Okay. And it doesn't belong there. Very important. Okay. Veterans non-educational benefits, death, disability, death pensions, etc. And then other untaxed income not reported, such as workman's comp, disability benefits, etc. Again, this is a place where folks who may not be required to file a tax return, and it looks like they have no income, this is where they're able to provide that information to demonstrate to the Fed and state that, in fact, I do have a resource. Okay.
Sorry. So
no, please.
Before we go to the next, I have a student who asked, they don't have GHS, the denotations, but there's a W.
Nope.
Nothing.
This list is specific. If it's not in this group, like I said, W, Z, A, I don't. That is very specific. They only want D, E, F, G, H, and S.
So only include that. So if you don't have that and it says W instead, should it be a 0 then?
Should be a 0. Yep, it should
Great.
always be a 0 because you don't have an applicable tax deferred program. That whatever that specific one is does not meet what the Fed is looking for. It's just D, E, F, G, H, and S. Again, double D is common. I haven't heard W before, but there's a couple other letters that are out there. They don't pertain. Please do not put them in there. That is a 0. Okay. All right. Parent asset information. As of today, does the total amount of your parents' current assets exceed $4,900? So then assets are the combination of the cash savings checking, investments in real estate, or if they have businesses or investment farms. Okay. So cash savings checking, as Ms. Cindy had indicated earlier, as of today, what is the approximate balance in those accounts? So you combine them. Okay. And in today's world, we have online banking, so colleges can ask for statements. So I can ask you for a statement. If you did your FAFSA on October 15th, and I'm questioning your cash savings checking account, then I can ask you to provide me proof of, or document why you provided that number. Investments, real estate. So real quick, investments, folks. And I'm reading this off the old paper FAFSA because it gives the best instructions. Investments include real estate, do not include your primary home, but do include any rental properties or any part of your house that you may rent out, okay? Trust funds, UGMA and UTMA accounts, money market funds, mutual funds, certificates of deposit, stocks, stock options, bonds, other securities, installments, and land sale contracts, including mortgages. Investments also include the 529B plans, okay? Now, investments do not include the home you live in. So if you live in your home and you don't rent out a room to a student or you don't have a business out of it or anything, you live in your home and it's regular like most folks, it's off the table, okay? The value of life insurance, ABLE accounts, your retirement plans, 401ks, pension funds, etc., annuities, non-educational IRA and KIA plans, or cash savings or checking accounts already reported in the previous statement. So folks, your primary retirements, your primary home are off the table for FAFSA. CSS, not necessarily the case, but we're not talking about the CSS profile today, and we're not talking about the school, any school's particular financial aid process, but for the federal and state government, primary homes, primary retirements, off the table, okay? Very important. And the 529B question we'll come to in a little bit. I know that's a big one. Businesses, you got to have 100 or fewer employees, full-time employees. So most businesses are not going to be required to be reported. I don't know how many investment farmers there are in Edison. I'm from Columbus, New Jersey. I grew up on a farm. I don't think that's really relevant that I know of. So it really would be a business investment or any of those other things. It would not be a farm general. We are a garden state, but not too many farmers anymore.
Sorry, I know you might have mentioned this already, but do we report IRA accounts? You said you would.
No. It's, our individual retirement account is off the table. Off the table. Okay. So it's because it's mine. It's the students. If a student has a 401k, that's a different story. But as the parents, because we're in the parent section up to this point, they are not required to provide that. Okay. Very, very important. Again, investments do not include your 401ks, your pension plans, your annuities, your non-educational IRAs. So if you have an educational IRA, that's something different. But generally, we have non-educational IRAs for retirement. They are off the table. Okay? All right. Now we're into the student section. All right? So the student is going to indicate whether or not they filed a tax return. Now, having worked a job doesn't mean I had to file. So if I only made a couple $1,000s in the summer and I didn't really pay any taxes, I might not have filed a tax return. So I would indicate will not file. Maybe I made a couple $1,000s and I did file because I was able to get a couple $100 back. Okay, so then I did file. So again, what was the student doing last year? Did they work? Did they file a tax return? Right? Most kids will not file, but if they did file, it'd be a 1040. And 99% of the time, their filing status is going to be single. So if they filed and they're single, which mostly is the case, they certainly will be able to link to the IRS, okay? Now, let's say they didn't, or if they want to add it manually because they don't have their FSA ID at this time, they can manually add in income. Just like in my case, being married separately, I would have to go line by line and add in. As long as the student has the tax return, they're going to tell them, for example, adjusted gross income comes from 1040, line 8B. Don't give me anything, just give me 8B. Don't think outside the box, just do exactly what they tell you.
This is, wouldn't this be the same 1040 form under the household income under their parents?
Well, this would be the students. So the parents have their 1040, but the student actually went out and had a job for the year at the mall and made $10,000. So they have to file, let's say.
They would have to file separately. They wouldn't submit, because they're dependent, wouldn't they submit their W-2 to their parents under the same household?
Well, some parents will take in students' income, especially when it's scholarship or things of that nature, but most students have their own job. They file their own separate tax return, okay? So my daughter's case, when she was a junior in high school, she started working at the mall, Woodbridge Center. She made enough money that she had to file. That year it was $6,500, so she made like $8,500. So by law, she made too much money that she couldn't file. Now I claim her as a dependent, as an exemption. That's different. I claim her as an exempt because I provide more than half the support, but she still had to file a tax return. Some kids, because they take enough taxes out, you know, you might have made $2,500 at Carvel, but you paid $300 in taxes, and your 1040 says you get that whole $300 back. So those kids are filing that tax return, but their parents are claiming them. So let's be clear about dependent student, right? Providing parental information. Parents file a tax return. Normally they're going to claim that student as an exemption, but that student may have independently earned enough money that they were required to file a tax return. And even if they didn't, they have a W-2, okay, which we'll come back to in a second. So in this scenario, let's say the student filed their own tax return. Parents are generally claiming them because they're living at home. As long as my student's living at home, I'm claiming them. I'm claiming them until I can't claim them anymore, because once you lose them, it hurts, right? So most families, especially for 18 to 22-year-olds, parents are going to be claiming the child, but that does not mean that the child is not working and not in a position where they have to file their own 1040, okay? And back in the old 1040 EZ days, for a lot of the parents and a lot of the older folks, that was that simple form. And then most kids, when they got to the section, they couldn't say that they weren't. They had to say that someone else claimed them, so they got that lower threshold. It's a similar situation. Does that make sense? Is it clear? Okay. All right. So they would provide adjusted gross income. This is the line mostly that the 18-year-olds are going to provide. Most of them will have worked and didn't file because they didn't have to. The amount of money they made or the taxes that they paid didn't warrant having to file a tax return. But they have money on the books, right? I got a W-2 from that job. That's the information they want to know, right? Student additional IRS information. So again, if they filed tax return, they're going to go to their tax return and provide that information. If not, it's a zero. Okay. They're going to ask the student the same question they ask the parents about any of these other types of resources that may come in that aren't necessarily covered in the first part of the tax section. So again, they'll ask them about combat pay, student grants and scholarships, aid reported. This is a place where a lot of times families, the parents will take the income in because it's if I absorb it into my adjusted gross income, my income, it has less of an impact. But if my student got this great scholarship and the room and board part, which is not tax deductible, was $20,000, it might be easier for me to deal with that $20,000 excess than say that 18 to 22-year-old, okay? Educational credits, generally, the parents are claiming that, not the student. But again, this could be an independent student, they may have it. Rollovers, generally not going to happen with 18 to 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds, IRA deductions, and then, but they may have tax exempt interest, right? Grandma and grandpa left me a little bit of money sitting in the bank and it collects interest. And that's one of the reasons maybe I have to file a tax return. A lot of kids may not work, but someone may have left them something or gave them something that requires them to have to report annually. So that would be some place where that information would show up. Again, if you don't have it, it'll be on tax return. If you don't have it, it's a 0. If you have it, then you provide the number that's there. Okay. Student additional financial aid information, child support paid, earnings from cooperative education, taxable earnings from employment programs, untaxed income. So if they receive child support, if they received housing and food allowances, tax deferred pensions, generally none of these are applicable to the 18 to 22-year-old, but again, you want to go through and make sure you're providing 0 so that the application knows you answered the question. Okay. Again, the asset, if the students have an account, even if there's $5 in it, you put $5 down, right? If they don't have an account, it's a 0, okay? As of today, net worth of investments, again, generally not going to pertain to the traditional undergraduate, 18 to 22-year-old, and the business piece. Wouldn't generally apply to them, but you're going to provide a 0 in that section. Okay, preparer information. The student and the student, applicant, and the parent are not preparers. Preparers are if you have a financial advisor, a tax preparer, someone, a third party. If you use a service, right? Some people pay to have their FAFSAs done, right? You would provide that information here. And that's why I say this is rare. I've not run into anybody in my experience where they've had a preparer use this, but there are schools that do, you know, I guess if you go to maybe Petty Prep or Lawrenceville or something and you pay to have somebody do it for you. But generally we're doing this, so you're going to check no. All right. Now, before we submit, very important, the FAFSA is going to allow you to look at the summary of all the questions and the answers. Folks, really take a look at this because historically, parents who fill out the application sometimes will repeat the information twice, especially in the income section, right? Parents make $100,000 and the kid made $100,000. The numbers are exactly the same. We know what happened. Parents entered the information twice by mistake. So this is a place where you want to go back and make sure in the student section, is that the student's information, whether it be demographic or financial? And for parents, am I putting my parents' information? Is the parent information in their section? Isn't it their income in their section? To make sure we don't have. Because listen, the FAFSA will still process and it'll make you seem very ineligible or vice versa. It might make you very eligible, but that's because the information was inaccurate. This is a place where you can really screen to make sure there are no issues. Okay. Now it's time to sign and submit. Okay. Hit the next. So we have 2 steps. 2 people have to sign. So student and at least the one parent have to sign in this case. So this is what this page is going to look like. Oh, I'm sorry. You're going to go in, student signature needed. You're going to provide student signature. Read these legalese. I agree to it. Everything's good. I'm going to provide my user ID and my FSA password, and I'm going to hit sign. It's going to come back and let me know student signed successfully. So first half is done. Now we go on to the parent. Same thing. Is it going to be parent 1 or parent 2? Okay. Let's say it's parent 1, parent 2, regardless. Whoever has the ID is going to sign. We're going to go in again and agree to the same things that the student did, that everything is correct, etc. Again, they're going to provide the ID and the password. They're going to have the opportunity to sign electronically, print, or signature. We want to sign electronically. That's the best way to do it. If we have families that are having issues, you can always print out the signature page and mail it in. It takes a little while, but because you're doing this way in advance, if you're in that situation where you really are struggling with FSA IDs, I've known families, it took them months to get the FSA ID. The fact that they applied early, they were able to print and send in the signature so that the FAFSA could be processed. Submitting the FAFSA without the signature will submit it, but it will be a reject and incomplete. So ultimately, you'll have to go in and sign it, okay? We only want to deal with signing without signatures if you're up against the deadline, and none of you are up against the deadline because you're way ahead of the curve at this point. If this was the spring and you were looking at a school deadline or something like that, you may want to submit it just to put your foot in the door. But generally, signing it electronically now is going to give you a clean application. And again, you have plenty of time. So now parents are signed. Now I'm ready to submit. Hit my submit button. I'm going to get a congratulations. It's going to let me know in about 7 to 10 days. They will not mail you a student aid report. They'll send you an email and tell you that it's available. Your state application, right? Because we're state residents. Some of us are looking at state schools. A while back, you used to have to go out to the New Jersey Higher Ed Student Assistance Authority and complete 3 or 4 supplemental questions. That ended 2 years ago. So now everything that's on the FAFSA is everything that HESA needs to get you started. HESA may want information after they processed your application, but your FAFSA represents your HESA application. Okay, so this is kind of what you get, and you'll get the list of schools. They give you some really nice consumer information like graduation rates, retention, transfer, all that kind of good stuff. And that's basically it for that piece. So I would say, Miss Cindy, at this point, if we want to open it to questions.
Would you prefer that I allowed for participants to unmute at this point, or continue to type in the chat box? Whichever. We have about 15 to 20 minutes left in our session today.
How many people we have in our?
Right now we have about 20, 23. Or not including us, like about 20, 22.
I mean, what's your been experience? 25 unmuted folks can manage to coordinate speaking. They won't all talk over each other. I'm fine with that. I come from a big family, so I'll hear through it. But I want to be respectful to everyone, that everyone gets a question, and if they don't, if they put it in the chat, then we can follow up.
Sure. Whatever their preference is, we can. I trust that everyone can kind of take turns, because the raising hands piece is a little tricky for me. But we did have a question in terms of the New Jersey questions, so that's no longer that gets gets redirected. So for HESA, do they still need to make the NJFAMS account?
Yes, thank you. So that's our next step. So once you've submitted that, the instructions will be that they want you to go out to the New Jersey FAM sites within about 3 to 5 days after submitting. So I give them about a week. I think 3 days is too soon. I would allow for like a week. If you submitted it today, this time next week, I would go out to the New Jersey FAM site. I would create a login and a password, because students are first time in, so they've got to create a login and password. Parents, be mindful, unlike the feds, you don't have access to this directly, okay? The fact that student and parents to do it together. With New Jersey FAMS, the portal is set up for the student. So parents have to remind the student, hey, we have to go out, you've got to set this account up. If you want to know about the state status, you're not getting an email as a parent. You must go work with your student and work through the portal. This is what it'll look like. First time in, again, you'll create your login and your password. Once you're in, this will be your welcome screen, okay? Right on top, if the state got your FAFSA and now they have questions, they will assign information on your to-do list. For example, we want your tax returns. We want to see a mortgage statement. They ask for all kinds of stuff, okay? View and update your school. We talked a lot about the FAFSA. You can put 10 schools on there. Each time it's processed, you can go in and update the FAFSA with new schools, take your schools in and out. The state will lock in on a state school after the first FAFSA, and they will determine your eligibility on that. If you're making subsequent college changes at the federal level, you will also need to go into the state and let them know. So I use the example, I applied to a school in Kentucky, didn't want to go, I decided last minute I wanted to go to a school in New Jersey. I added that New Jersey school to my FAFSA, but I have to come out to the state site and also let them know I have a state school now, because as far as they're concerned, they still see me as going to Kentucky, not going to a state school. I put Seton Hall on there, but now I want to be a Rutgers student. So I have to go out there and change it from Seton Hall to Rutgers, because the state, unlike the Fed, will award you based on the sector of school you attend. So if I go to Middlesex County College, it's a much smaller grant than if I go to Rutgers University, Princeton, or if I go to NJIT, because the state will look at the sector, the cost of tuition, and that will determine the size of the grant and the range of people who qualify. The Fed is going to treat you exactly the same regardless of what school, whether I go to Middlesex, Rutgers, Princeton, NJIT, I'll get the same federal consideration, but the state makes a distinction. So it's very important that if you're choosing a state school and you're locked in on it, that you make sure that you update your FAMs to make sure that the state knows this is where you intend to go, okay? Award eligibility, that's what we want to know. So the state will tell you right away once they process you, if everything is finished and they're happy, they'll tell you if you're eligible or not, okay?
So I have a quick question regarding,
Please.
we have a parent who was denied the Pell Grant based on his 2019 filing. So, you know, I asked you this before the presentation in terms of, you know, job loss due to COVID-19. What if the income change, you know, occurs in 2020, 2021? Can you just kind of go over that again in terms of the special circumstances?
Yep. Folks, there is a process that's called special or unusual circumstance professional judgment. The federal and state government require that you submit the FAFSA as per the tax return. Once the FAFSA is processed, if you've experienced a change of circumstance such as loss of employment, death, disability, retirement, divorced, you may have filed the FAFSA and now your parents are divorced. You have to have a process to be able to go back in and adjust the numbers to reflect what's actually going on. So I'm going to use the current example. For this year, we used 2018's tax return. Everybody got hit in March, right? So we're doing special circumstances. So families are telling me, Tom, I lost my job in March of 2020. So I would tell them, okay, there's a process, special circumstance, and you've got to provide me documentation because I have to now project a 2020 and replace what's in the system now. For next year, it'll be 2019 versus 2021. So you put in 2019's information. I'm going to ask you what's going on in 2021. I'm not working, Tom. Okay. Provide me proof of unemployment. Provide me certain things so that I can document this. Some schools may compare 19 versus 20. The school will determine the base year is always going to be 2019 for next year. The question will be, does your school compare 2019 versus 2020 or 2019 versus 2021? At TCNJ, we do 2-year difference. We do 2019 and 2021. So even if you're experiencing that special circumstance now, I can't talk about it. I have to wait until 2021. If you're still experiencing it, and unfortunately a lot of us will be, that's the time that you can speak with your school and they will let you know what documentation you provide. All schools must have a process. So you want to get familiar with your college's websites. Financial aid websites will indicate, in my case, we call it special circumstance. At other schools, they call it unusual circumstance or professional judgment. If you're not sure, you reach out to the people at your school and just let them know, hey, I've had a change in my situation. They know, and then they'll bring you in. But I want folks to be reassured that if you've had one of these changes, you have the right to work with your school for redress, okay? But it's your responsibility. You must self-identify. You have to let them know because I can't know. You have to tell me, and then they will have a process involved. Be prepared to provide the base year tax return 2019 because before I change anything, I have to make sure the initial starting point is correct. Be prepared if it's unemployment to provide proof of unemployment. If I just lost a job, a last pay stub. You know, there's different criteria. The biggest thing is there is a process. All schools have to have it. The information should be housed on the school's financial aid webpage. If you're not seeing it, reach out to them and say, how do I change my situation or how do I change or update my FAFSA to reflect my current status because I've experienced one of these changes, okay? Biggest one is unemployment, okay? Second is divorce and separation. We get some retirement, we get some disability. Unfortunately, we get death. But clearly unemployment and divorce separation are the 2 reasons why we would go back and do a special circumstance to a FAFSA. It's a great question, and I know it's stressful for people, especially now. There is a process. Be aware of it. When your kids are out looking for those filing deadlines, you know, priority deadlines for financial aid for each school, have them look for the special circumstance information also. Okay? It's pretty good. Okay. All right. To-do list, just to give you an idea of some of the things the state could ask for, right? Here's an example of a student who may have indicated that the parent passed away. So the state is saying, okay, show me, right? We believe you, but you have to document it now. So that's kind of a screenshot of how they will ask for stuff. Also out at the FAM site, the state has a handful of state scholarships, and that's where the student through HESA could apply for it. So that's another reason why you want to get out to the FAM site. So if any of these things pertain to you, this is where you would go ahead to apply. Eligibility information. So again, this is more information about what the screens look like when you're inside. Okay, they've got these nice icons, and when you click on them, they'll give you descriptions, important, right? Your application's incomplete, it's under review, you qualify, your school's certified, your stuff, etc. So there's a lot of different things on here. You do not qualify. So if you do not qualify, this red X, they'll tell you why. It's important to read that because maybe their information is incorrect, right? They may have put something, for example, some students fail to report the in-state residency properly. So you may get an error that says you haven't lived in New Jersey long enough to be eligible, but you're a native, you were born here. So reading this kind of stuff helps to kind of facilitate any kind of error and correct it effectively. Don't just assume, make sure that you know why you are eligible or you're ineligible. Very important, okay? Just a snapshot of how the awards look, right? So you can see at different sectors, Georgian Court, private 4-year, state of New Jersey's NJIT, the state, how the different awards can vary, the amounts and eligibility. You know, at some schools, the student is eligible, right, at NJI or Georgian Court at NJIT, but they're not so much at Rutgers. Or they're not at all at the community college, because again, community college has the least expensive sector, so least amount of people qualify. But as you get more expensive, right, tuition goes up. That's why it's just called tuition aid grant. Those grants will increase and the people who are eligible will increase, okay? State deadlines, right? You could do FAFSA anytime between now and June 30th of next summer and still be eligible to be considered. But for the state grant, once you're in the system, so it's not going to apply to you for this year because you'll be freshmen going in, but next year, once you're in, if you do get state aid, the state is holding you to deadlines. For example, April 15th. So my students that are currently freshmen this year are bound by April 15th, 2021 to renew their FAFSA, or they lose tag consideration. Doesn't matter how eligible you are. If you applied on April 16th, you're getting a big 0 from the state. They are very serious about this. They don't print money, so they have to have hard deadlines. And that's how they process. They also have completion deadlines for information. So again, at the state, like November 1st, we're coming up right now. So I have a handful of students, unfortunately, are not complete with the state and are eligible and may lose their aid come November 1st or their eligibility because they haven't finalized these processes with the state. So it's very important if your student is a state resident going to state school that you be in this New Jersey FAMS portal and that you follow up on this information. So critical, because when the state says no and they shut the door, you're not getting it open. The feds are much more liberal. Schools can be liberal with their money. The state is very hard and fast, okay? So definitely question time. We didn't have any of the 529B questions. So just real quick for folks, because I always get that at Edison, 529B plans that are in the name of the parent for the child will be reported in the parent section. Okay, let me go back real quick, see if I find that slide. Okay, and it's for all the children. So even though you have 1 in college, you have 2 at home, but you have 3 529B plans, you must report all the plans. Okay, if your grandparents of the student or aunt or uncle or someone had a 529B for the student would report that in their section, okay? So if the parents are the holders of the 529Bs, it's in their name for the benefit of the student and their children, they must report it in their section. If it's the student is getting it from a relative other than mom or dad, they will collect it in their section. I'm just trying to dig up that. It's usually at the end here. Yeah, they're not asking it. It's usually in here. They'll ask about 529Bs. It's usually a more specific question, but I apologize because I'm not really seeing it the way I should, but that's the clear distinction, folks. 529Bs in the parent's name and the children's name must be reported in the children or parents section. Anything that's held not by the parents is held in the student section. You won't be reporting any 529Bs if grandma has it for junior because they haven't spent it yet. You as the parent, even though you haven't spent it yet, it's in your household, it's a resource, so you have to show it, okay? So that's another kind of nuance, right? If someone outside of the household is holding the 529B, it's not gonna show up until next year after you've spent some of it. But if it's held within the household by the parents, you're gonna document that this year, okay? Other questions?
So we have about 5 more minutes. If you would like to submit any questions, or you can go ahead and unmute yourselves, you can go ahead and submit them now. And again, this video or this presentation will be recorded and it will be posted on our senior Google Classroom as well as our school counseling webpage under financial aid. And I just posted the link on the chat box.
Yes.
A copy of this transcript with questions that you submitted will also be available as a text form. So yes, so someone asked, does a child need an ID as well as a parent? So yes, prior to completing the FAFSA, you need to have one FSA ID for a parent and one FSA ID for the child. You're going to create the FSA ID with your social security numbers. Okay, so it must match. The child's social security must match the FSA ID, the child's. You're going to be using it every year that you're enrolled in the university. So for myself, when I was an undergrad, I filed FAFSA roughly 4 times. So you're going to do this initial time is you know, the hardest because it's your first go around. But after that, when you're renewing every year, it gets easier. You just want to do it as early as possible. Every October 1st is when FAFSA opens because money does run out. Okay, so in my previous presentation, I did give a small anecdote about how junior year, I don't know what happened. I forgot to file FAFSA at NYU. So I lost my work study, even though you need to file because you need to show colleges how you're paying. So they didn't know how I was paying. So I did an emergency FAFSA. I did it within a few days. It was processed. I got the classes I wanted back, but they ran out of the pool of money for work study, unfortunately.
Yes, yeah, and that's correct. Any campus-based aid or institutional aid, a lot of schools use the FAFSA as a way to determine how they spend their in-house money. And again, that's limited. If you're eligible for a Pell Grant, you'll get your Pell Grant. If you're eligible for a state tag grant, you'll get it. But anything beyond that, work study, any institutional monies are limited and they are first come, first served. So that's why it's so important to do it early and accurate so that your school's got the information. And again, you're in the running for those things always. You don't want to miss out on money because you failed to submit in the proper time frame. So important.
Another question maybe about the, after FAFSA has been completed, no additional New Jersey questions. Is there anything else that needs to be completed other than a college application? Someone at the beginning of the presentation mentioned the CSS profile. I don't know if you had a few minutes just to describe the differences between two very briefly. Some colleges might ask you for both FAFSA and CSS profile, depending on if they're private or public.
Generally, there's about 400 schools still left in the country that use the CSS profile. And if they're using the CSS profile, they're telling you we have we have institutional money that requires a higher level of scrutiny or consideration to be eligible, okay? Because the CSS profile can ask you about your primary home, your retirement. It can ask about divorced parents, non-custodial parents. So they can ask you credit card debt, car loans. You name it, they can ask you those things. And what they're doing is they have in-house money that requires a higher level of evaluation before they can give it out. So you would have to complete that. Some schools don't use the CSS profile, but they have their own institutional version. So again, we need to get out to those financial aid web pages per schools to make sure beyond the FAFSA, is there anything else that they're looking for? Most schools do the FAFSA. Again, there's 400 CSS schools left in the country, and they're generally your private schools. Stevens is the only one left in New Jersey that's still using it, but it's a very expensive school, but then they have their own money, right? Princeton has an in-house thing, right? So some schools are like, I'm not bothering with CS, we design our own application. But there's still, and that's that question that you're asking, there still may be one additional piece that you have to do, and you will only know that when you look by school, what else are they asking for? Everybody requires FAFSA, you know? Harvard takes the FAFSA, Burlington County College takes the FAFSA, but Burlington County College is not asking for a CSS profile, but Harvard may. They may have their own in-house profile, right? So you want to know, number one, when do I have to have my FAFSA in? And number two, do you want anything beyond that? And again, the more expensive schools, especially private schools, are going to ask for some additional information because they have institutional monies, and those monies have different or maybe elevated criteria that the Fed just don't ask for. Like I said, Fed is not asking about your primary home. So that person in Spring Lake that's got a $5 million home and they don't owe anything on it, you would never know it on the FAFSA. But guess what? Monmouth University is, because when you apply to Monmouth University, you're going to want to know about your primary home or something like that. That's just an example, but it's a great question, and it varies by school to school. And you can keep in mind, the more expensive the school, the more amount of institutional money, the definite possibility they're going to ask you for some additional stuff. Okay.
Anyone have any more questions before we end today's session? Okay, so everyone, I just like to thank again Mr. Foga for joining us. Oh, we have one more.
Okay, cool.
So for NJ FAMs, that should be within a week. So I had a question about NJ FAMs, when you need to log on to that. If your student,
I would allow a week from submission.
Okay. So if your student is only applying for out-of-state schools, do we still need to do NJ FAMs?
I would, because that's your feeling right now, right? And I would say you need to have at least one school, unless you're a veterinarian student. You should have one state school, just because you're state resident, state tuition, state aid. I'm not saying that your student would necessarily want to go, but when you're shopping as a consumer, you don't want to pass over the fact that, you know, the state may be able to do something for me that some of these other schools can't. Ultimately, if you know you're not, then you can disregard it. But I just feel like you don't want to limit your options. And it's always helpful if you have at least one state option. I know we're limited in sometimes the majors. I remember physical therapy when I was a high school senior was a booming major. Nobody in New Jersey did it. You had to go out of state, which was crazy. It was a great program, great employment, great, you know, professional. It took us years before we got it. So I understand why sometimes you have to leave. But if you have a state option, you definitely want to keep them in mind. And that's why you want to set that FAMS application up. If you decide later, you can always go back in later. You know, if it's a month later or 2 months later or whatever, that door is not going to be shut. But keep that in mind and really think about, is there absolutely no state option that meets your criteria? If there isn't, I understand, because we're not the super higher ed states like California or New York or other states where they've got everything at all levels. But again, from the consumer side, don't want folks to pass up something that's your backyard. And you've been paying taxes to support these, especially as a state institution. So maybe you want to take a look at it.
So again, everyone, thank you everyone for joining. I hope this was informative. We will be posting a recording on our Google Classroom. So ask your seniors to join our Google Classroom if they're not already part of it. We'll also be posting this on the school webpage. My contact information is available also on the webpage. We also will be offering Financial Aid Fridays with our college counselor, Ms. Agmana. I will post that as well. We'll be sending out information on how you can book an appointment. If you feel more comfortable completing the FAFSA one-on-one, or if you have additional questions about the CSS profile, Ms. Agmana is going to be the go-to for the Financial Aid Fridays. So thank you very much, Mr. Foga, for your time.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing you again next year.
We'll see you guys. Be well. Everybody be safe, please.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye. Okay, let me see.